Most of the people in this house will soon be dead. They are caught in the jaws of a massive hurricane that is slammed into the Gulf Coast of the United States. But this is not New Orleans in 2005. The year is 1900, and this storm will be 4 times more deadly than Hurricane Katrina. 140-mile-an-hour winds, waves 13 feet high, and wind-blown killer debris. This is the story of the deadliest natural disaster in American history, the Great Galveston Hurricane, one of history's perfect storms. On the morning of September 8th, 1900, the killer hurricane lurks 90 miles offshore. But in Galveston, Texas, it's clear skies. This is Isaac Klein, Galveston's Weather Bureau chief.
Now imagine, it's Saturday morning, September 8th, 1900. Isaac Klein had gone out very early that morning. He didn't see anything particularly unusual. The swells might have been a little bigger, but it was pretty calm.
Klein's received reports of a storm somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, but no one knows where it's heading. He measures the time between waves hitting the shoreline. In an era before satellites and modern storm tracking, unusual sea swells are considered a warning sign of an approaching storm.
The Gulf of Mexico. It's a little rough, and yet just 8 hours later, it's a raging wall of black, destructive water.
In 1900, Galveston is well on its way to becoming the greatest coastal city in the southern United States. It's a barrier island off the Texas coast, a spit of sand that has become a glittering jewel on the Gulf of Mexico.
Before the 1900 storm, Galveston was one of the largest cities in the state, and it was one of the wealthiest per capita in the United States. 90% of all goods and immigration coming into the state of Texas poured in through the port of Galveston.
We're coming down the Wall Street of the Southwest, Galveston Strand. This was the heart of the business district here. There was cotton, insurance, financial, mercantile, retail, you name it.
Today's Galveston is no longer the bustling business capital of Texas it once was. Its pace has slowed considerably. But remnants of its glorious past can still be found. Buildings of a bygone era still remain.
Very Gothic, very ornate, because the people had money.
Almost every first that happened in the state of Texas happened here in Galveston.
They were the first city in Texas to have electricity. They were the first city in Texas to have a telephone. Galveston even had a streetcar that ran up and down the beach.
It was the most modern city in Texas.
It was quite the place. It was the star in the crown of Texas. And then overnight, all of that changed.
Isaac Klein is posted to Galveston a decade before the storm. He's considered one of the top weather scientists in the country.
This is the Levee building. This was the location for the Weather Bureau's weather office in Galveston at the time of the 1900 storm, and the instruments would have been up here on the roof. Isaac had rain gauges, thermometers, humidity devices, and an anemometer to measure the winds. Today, there's some high-rise buildings around here, but this is probably one of the taller buildings, which is why it made a good location. They get a full view of the island, of course, looking out to the east, south, west, and then to the north, you're right on the harbor and the bay there.
Isaac Klein's younger brother Joseph is his assistant. They are men of science, part of a generation who believe new technologies are paving the way to a bright future. There are fortunes to be made in the American West, and Galveston is the gateway to this new frontier of riches. Shortly after his posting, town leaders ask Isaac to evaluate the odds of Galveston getting hit by a major hurricane.
He wrote an essay before the 1900 storm saying that no storm of any magnitude would do any damage in Galveston because of the long slope going out to sea and because of Galveston being at basically a 45-degree angle to the Gulf, as if hurricanes only travel in straight lines.
Isaac goes on the record. A big destructive storm here is unlikely. Galveston is safe. City leaders breathe a sigh of relief. In reality, Galveston is a disaster waiting to happen. The city is flat as a pancake, just 8.5 feet above sea level at its highest point. And it's surrounded by water. The Gulf of Mexico on one side, and Galveston Bay on the other. There are no levees, no seawalls to protect the city from flooding.
When Isaac Klein was here, Galveston had been in existence less than 100 years. That's a very short period of record, meteorologically. They had not witnessed anything like a hurricane take out the whole island. So when he said it would not happen here, people just took that in stride.
It's a time of prosperity.
Dr. Klein met and fell in love with Cora May, the church organist. One of the sweetest, nicest people. I mean, everyone just said, "Oh, sweet Cora May." 9 months to the date after their wedding, they had their first child. At the time of the 1900 storm, Dr. Isaac Klein and his wife had 3 children, and she was expecting their 4th child.
Isaac has no idea how much his life is about to change.
There is a human tendency to be overly optimistic when it comes to certain threats. There is a usefulness to this optimism, right? I mean, it makes you want to keep on living if you think that you are special and exempt from some of the darker aspects of life. But there is also a danger.
A danger that is quickly approaching. The killer hurricane is on its way and is threatening to claim its first victims. 93 miles off the coast, the steam freighter Pensacola, which left Galveston that morning, has drifted into the storm. Now her crew struggles to keep the steamship upright in winds over 140 miles an hour. The ship's captain is J.W. Simmons, who's never encountered a storm this powerful. A hurricane of this force can churn up water from 130 feet below the ocean's surface to create waves as tall as a 10-story building. If the waves rupture the hull, a ship this size could plummet to the bottom in just 5 minutes. In an era before ship-to-shore communications, there's no way for him to call for help or warn others the storm is coming. This hurricane is on a collision course with Galveston. On September 8th, 1900, Galveston's destruction is just hours away. Texas is no stranger to hurricanes. More than 60 have made landfall in the last 150 years. But a handful stand out, including the Great Storm of 1900 and Hurricane Ike in 2008. Ike killed 195 people, did $38 billion in damage while hitting Galveston the hardest. Mark Davidson was there and barely survived.
This is used to be my home on Crystal Beach prior to Hurricane Ike. Right now I would be standing in my garage, and over in this area was the laundry room. I had a workshop over here, and up above me would have been the bedroom, and the kitchen was above that area, and living room, and my bedroom was over there. Most of this was my stuff out of my toolboxes and stuff. It's just weird to see it. It's all junk now. This is what's left. This is what I came home to.
Hurricane Ike bears a chilling similarity to the 1900 storm. They were of the same intensity and followed the same path. By looking at Ike, we can understand how the great storm of 1900 behaved and why it was so deadly. Ike was born over 4,000 miles away from Galveston. The air over Africa is the birthplace where all Atlantic hurricanes first take shape.
During the warm season, June through October, areas of disturbed weather, clusters of moisture and thunderstorm roll off of Africa, work their way west across the open Atlantic, the Caribbean. There may be 70 to 100 of those such disturbed areas in that 6-month period. Only 12 develop into what would be a named tropical cyclone because a whole lot of things have to come together.
But what made Ike and the 1900 storm so unique was the unusual way both behaved after the long journey across the Atlantic. When storms approach the Americas, they encounter weather systems that influence their path.
Once a storm forms, it's moving in kind of like a river in the atmosphere. A lot of the times, the river turns and takes the storms out over the open Atlantic or up the eastern seaboard of the United States.
Scientists call the moment when a hurricane turns north a recurve, and most of the time it occurs somewhere between the 75th and 85th lines of longitude. This is precisely what Isaac Klein believed in 1900, that hurricanes turn north long before they make it to Texas. We know now that's not always the case.
At other times, that river is coming straight west into the Gulf of Mexico. So that's when we have to worry about storms in the Texas coast.
In 2008, a huge area of high pressure blanketed most of the United States, blocked Hurricane Ike from turning north, and set it on a course for Galveston. The same thing happened in 1900. Hurricane Ike could be tracked from the sky. The U.S. Air Force has a squadron of specialized aircraft called the Hurricane Hunters that can fly directly into storms.
We're the eyes and ears of the hurricane forecaster out on the aircraft when we fly through hurricanes to determine what's going on in the storm, how it's changing in intensity. And currently the aircraft you see behind me are the only aircraft in the world right now that has the capability to collect this information.
The Hurricane Hunters are really part of the early warning system. We go out there and our job is to pinpoint where it is. They want to know what the conditions are out there, the temperature, barometric pressure, the winds. That data all goes back to the Hurricane Center. They crunch the numbers basically, and they issue forecasts based on that information. And the bottom line is it saves lives.
But in 1900, airplanes don't exist. Storm tracking is done by men like Isaac and Joseph Klein at land-based weather stations. All they can do is make local observations and record the data: wind speed, air pressure. The U.S. Weather Bureau has a similar station in Cuba. It's the last place the storm is observed before heading into open waters.
It came off of Cuba. It may have been at the high end of a tropical storm or maybe a low end of a hurricane.
After the report from Cuba, the Weather Bureau's headquarters in Washington sends out a telegram to all regional offices. including Galveston. It says that a storm of moderate intensity is moving toward Florida and is expected to recurve northeast away from Texas. Isaac receives the telegram. What he doesn't know is that it's dead wrong. September 7th, 1900. It's been 2 days since the storm left Cuba. It's traveled over open waters and now slams into the steamship Pensacola. And something's happened. The storm has grown 10 times more powerful.
The one scientific part of the job that kept me awake at night was what we call rapid intensification. That's where you have a storm near land that's not really all that strong, and then suddenly becomes a violent hurricane, much stronger than we anticipated.
Rapid intensification occurs when hurricanes pass over patches of deep, warm water. The summer of 1900 was unusually hot. While over the Gulf, superheated waters have funneled massive amounts of energy into the heart of the storm and turned it into a monster.
Somewhere while it was crossing the Gulf of Mexico, the 1900 storm probably went through a very strong rapid intensification that took it from that weekend hurricane to a Category 4 hurricane prior to making landfall here. We don't even have the tools today to forecast rapid intensification with a great deal of skill.
Captain Simmons and his crew are now fighting 140-mile-an-hour winds and sheets of rain like porcupine needles. There's no sign of it letting up. The Pensacola's experience is relived by Joseph Busey, a crewman on a dive vessel, a century later in Hurricane Ike.
The captain, he says, it's not too bad. It's only a hurricane, like a Category 2.
I came in from L.A. last night, and they called me to come help out on the boat, the Odyssey. We're taking the boat up into Upper Bay, Galveston, where we're going to try to keep the boat out of the hurricane's waves. Hopefully we can save this boat.
I really didn't know we were going to sit there in the bay in Galveston and ride this thing out. So I brought out my little camcorder and I started documenting, because if I didn't survive, maybe my camera could, and it could tell the story.
We're going to set the storm out. We got 3 anchors going up to the front.
So after we got them all set up, went inside and I started watching the news. And then I'm realizing that hurricane is just take over the entire Gulf, and this is about to hit, and it's going to hit hard.
Winds are getting up, 70 miles an hour.
The crew of the Pensacola has been fighting the storm for several hours. Captain Simmons checks his charts. The ship is blown 43 miles back towards the Texas coast. Galveston is doomed. September 8th, 1900, 10:30 a.m. Isaac Klein surveys the Galveston beach. The massive storm is moving closer, and the waves are getting bigger and rougher. He returns to the weather office and receives yet another telegram from Washington. It says the storm has not moved northeast as forecast, but is slowly heading west into the Gulf of Mexico towards the Texas coast. The telegram avoids calling the storm what it is.
They didn't like to use words like hurricane and cyclone and tornado and things. It made people nervous.
Now, Isaac has a critical decision to make. Recommend an evacuation or not? 108 years later, during Hurricane Ike, Galveston's mayor faced that same dilemma.
Knowing the history of the 1900 storm and what happened to Galveston, I knew, being a Galveston native, that the best thing for my people to do was to leave. Ike was such a big storm. I knew that our people had to get out of here. I could tell by the wind and the waves and the rising of the tide that we were going to be in trouble, big-time trouble.
The rain is just going sideways. Our wind gauge on our boat was pegged out at like 90-something. Now I'm realizing this ain't just an adventure of some sort. This could be my life. This could be the last thing I ever do.
With Ike, Texas officials issue a new warning, never used before. Residents in single-family homes face certain death if they don't evacuate. 1 p.m., September 8th, 1900. The outer edges of the storm slam into Galveston. The rain is coming down in sheets, and the streets begin to flood. Isaac hoists the storm warning flag on top of the weather building, but few in Galveston take notice. Galveston has seen its fair share of bad storms, and there's been no reason to think this one will be any worse. Isaac tries to reassure residents. He suggests that they get their goods and valuables off the ground and advises them to take shelter.
It's a human nature thing when it comes to natural disasters that you really don't prepare for the worst or even expect it. If you go any place on the coast that's had a huge hurricane that's killed a lot of people, you will hear people say, I had no idea this could happen to me.
But as the day wears on, the winds grow stronger. The storm is coming in at the most destructive angle possible. Winds on the right side of a hurricane are the most powerful. This hurricane is coming in slightly to the left of the city center. Disaster is imminent. It could not be worse. Isaac sends a calm, carefully worded telegram to Washington. Such high water with opposing winds, never observed previously. Because his message lacks urgency, no alarms go off in the Weather Bureau office.
It would be easy enough with hindsight to say, oh, he should have done more, he should have done more. But if you're faced with an unprecedented situation, it kind of expects a lot of somebody to have that kind of prescience that, oh, this is going to get really bad.
Even during Hurricane Ike, after the mandatory evacuation order, some people choose to stay in their homes.
Probably about 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the water was about 5, 6 foot deep, and I could see fish swimming around where my yard normally was. The water rose all the way to the bottom of my deck, which was about 8 feet in the air. So I went in the house and I put on my dog tags because I figured if I had to swim or if I did perish in the storm, they would know who I was.
The biggest problem most people have in every country in the world before and during a disaster is a delayed reaction to the disaster. And again, that's not because they're fools. It's literally the way your brain is wired, is to not respond, not accept what's happening.
"3:30 p.m. Despite hurricane-force winds and water a foot deep in the streets, many locals enjoy a late lunch at a popular bar on the Strand. They've seen bad storms before, and life goes on.
A lot of the businessmen down here, they used to gather at this place, which was known as Ritter's Saloon and Cafe. And on this particular day, everyone was looking out and going, look, the paving blocks in Washington, we're having a little blow. The water had already risen up over the curbs. Everyone was in there, and there was one gentleman named Spencer. And he was talking to a friend of his, and the friend said, "Hey, Spence, I just looked around the room. There's 13 people in here." He said, "Nothing like that's going to scare me. I'm not superstitious." And shortly afterward, the winds, the rising winds from that storm ripped the roof off. The pressure that was suddenly let into the room bowed out the frames that hold up the sides of the building, and the ceiling fell in and crushed about half the people in this saloon. And the water rushed in, a number of people killed. Mr. Spencer was killed.
The great storm of 1900 has claimed its first victims, and tens of thousands more are now in grave danger.
Well, the word spread very quickly up and down the strand here that this building had collapsed, and maybe there was more to this little blow than the fact that Isaac Klein, the weatherman, said nothing like that could happen here.
Ritter's Saloon is just a block and a half away from Isaac's office. As he wades back into the streets, it's clear the storm is getting worse with each passing moment, and now Isaac knows his overconfidence has put thousands of lives at risk. Saturday, September 8th, 1900. A hurricane that was predicted to turn out to the Atlantic has instead turned westward over the Gulf of Mexico and collides with Galveston, Texas. Now the hurricane unleashes a new deadly threat. Storm surge, a bulge of water that is slowly engulfing the city.
Storm surge is, I'll give it my best attempt at layman's language. On land, the wind keeps pushing these waves further up, and you start running this water up over that shallow land. So now you have this higher elevation of water, and the higher winds as the eye of the hurricane comes in lifts it to another elevation, and onshore it comes. Back at the time of the 1900 storm, we really didn't know what the driving mechanics were of storm surge, and not even close to having a way to measure it or forecast it.
Galveston is now flooding. Isaac sends Joseph to phone Western Union in Houston because the telegraph lines are down. The message gets through. Gulf rising rapidly. Half the city now underwater. Then the phone lines go dead.
Hello?
Communications are lost. It will take days before anyone grasps the magnitude of the destruction. There's nothing more Joseph and Isaac can do to help Galveston. Isaac leaves the office and goes home to protect his family from a hurricane that's worse than any he has ever imagined possible. His house is 3 blocks away from the Gulf of Mexico and one of the best-built houses in Galveston. Isaac has always firmly declared it storm-proof.
When Isaac reached his house, he found 50 people there. And they said, "Dr. Klein, we know your attention to detail. And if there's one house that's going to stand, it's got to be this one." Even the people who built the house for him were there. And he said everyone was welcome to stay.
Right behind me was the site of Isaac Klein's residence. For a time, they were safe. It was strong. It was built with storms in mind. They lost the patio. They lost part of the roof. They lost a lot of the outlying parts of the house, but the structure was sound.
Just as residents of Galveston think it could not get worse, it does. 140-mile-an-hour winds fill the air with deadly flying debris. Today, the storm would be classified as a Category 4 hurricane. But it wasn't just wind or storm surges doing the damage.
pillars during the hurricane. A lot of people forget this was roofing slate.
25 years earlier, there had been a horrible fire that burned 40 city blocks. That fire had been spread by cedar shingles. After that time, City Council said, no more cedar shingles, slate shingles. Well, now those slate shingles were flying through the air like missiles.
What wasn't flying through the air was being pushed by walls of water that were going toward the bay. It's only 2 miles wide. And when people said, move to higher ground, the highest ground was 8 feet above sea level at Broadway. People did go there, but where are you going to go?
Inside Isaac's house, the water is now almost 2 feet deep on the main floor. With water rising, the air is a swirling mass of deadly projectiles. It's hard to believe that the worst is yet to come. At 6:30 p.m., the wind shifts. It now blows from the south, bringing with it a new surge of water from the Gulf. Waters from both the bay and the Gulf flood the city.
Galveston was not half underwater. It was completely underwater. The waters of the bay had met the waters of the Gulf.
In Isaac's house, the water rises 4 feet in just 4 seconds, and the entire first floor is submerged. 50 terrified people climb to the second floor and cram into the bedroom where Isaac's pregnant wife is in bed. Joseph tells Isaac that they should evacuate to higher ground. Isaac disagrees. It's deadly outside, and he believes his home can withstand the storm. The surge tears up everything in its path, including a quarter-mile-long piece of streetcar track.
And it just cut everything to the ground. It pushed the bodies, the houses, the debris, carriages, electric wiring, telephone poles, you name it. So one of Galveston's most famous and popular attractions actually became a weapon of destruction and death.
Knocked the Klein home off of its foundation, tilted the house, and then the house sank like a rock.
Joseph, Isaac's younger brother, he grabbed Isaac's 2 children and threw himself through a window. He managed to get onto a floating porch roof.
Isaac was forced back against a chimney, and a big dresser came and blocked him from escaping. And the house sank, and he took a big, deep breath to fill his lungs with water. Isaac Klein was a very practical man, so he reasoned, well, if this is it and I'm going to die, let's get it over with quickly.
You know, here in the East End Historical District, you can feel the sense of history. You smell it. It's in the air, it's in the salt air, and you can almost sense the ghosts. Imagine what it was like in this area. We're about 10 blocks from the beach here. The water level was probably 12, 14, maybe 20 feet.
Isaac Klein is trapped underwater. The 50 people he was trying to protect from a hurricane are now either dead or fighting for their lives. He decides to let himself drown to end the agony. But fate has something else in store for him.
When he woke up, his head was bobbing above the water. He had a big timber behind him and another timber that was perpendicular, pounding against his chest, forcing the water out.
Klein finds himself in a maelstrom of water and wind, and his family is missing.
There was a flash of lightning, and in that flash of lightning, he saw his 6-year-old daughter. Joseph, on the roof with the other 2 girls, saw Isaac, and he called to them. Isaac found a piece of roof, put the 2 girls up on it, and hopped up on it himself, and they were reunited. He looked around in the water, and he saw no one. There had been 50 people in that house.
Among the missing, his pregnant wife, Cora May. After hours of drifting through the night, Isaac and his daughters run aground, only 4 blocks from where their house once stood. They find a house and crawl inside. They are among the lucky few who will survive the night. The morning of September 9th, 1900, after fighting the storm for 24 hours, the men on the steamship Pensacola returned to Galveston Harbor, which they sailed out from the day before. And it's not there. The shore is wiped out, with towering heaps of timber everywhere, looking like a giant barricade. The crew can already smell the dead.
Many people emerged from their houses the next day and were like, "Where's the city?"
These are stereo slides, and they were taken right after the 1900 storm to show the death and destruction of the storm. And these slides are placed in the stereoscope, and you can look at it, and then it makes the pictures in 3D.
An assistant of Thomas Edison happens to be in Galveston and captures footage of the devastated harbor. It's one of the first newsreels in history. The wreckage in 1900 is repeated in 2008 after Hurricane Ike.
It was just mass destruction when I finally got off. Boats were all over land, sailboats here and there. Mud was all over the streets. It was horrible. It is just by the saving grace of God that I survived.
In 1900, Isaac Klein goes to the Weather Bureau's roof to view the devastation. There are bodies everywhere. Thousands. He'll discover that of the 50 people gathered in the house he declared hurricane-proof, only 18 survived, and his wife Cora May is still missing.
I thought it was the end of the world. It looked like it was the end of the world.
In Hurricane Ike, Mark Davidson swam for 17 hours and barely lived to tell the tale.
It was like having every emotion you could go through all at once. I was sad because I thought I was going to die. I was happy because I was still alive. I was thinking about my family, my wife, my brothers, wondering if I was ever going to see them again.
And the next day, people stepped out to see an absolutely flat sea and a beautiful mother-of-pearl sky on a very calm day. It was as if nature felt guilty for what had happened the night before. I didn't do it. Oh, no. And that's when they began to find the bodies.
The great 1900 storm of Galveston was the worst natural disaster ever to strike the United States. And overnight, 1/6 of the population was killed.
At least 8,000 people died in the hurricane. Some estimates put it as high as 12,000.
The scene was really medieval. I mean, right down to dead wagons. When the cart would come along and you'd throw your bodies onto it. It was just appalling. After the water receded and everybody realized there's thousands and thousands of bodies, their first idea was to bury them at sea. So they put them on barges, took them out, and threw them overboard.
This particular image shows the barge that contained 800 bodies that was taken out to sea for burial.
The next day, the tide turns and brings those hundreds of corpses back to the beach.
So then they were really left no alternative but just a mass cremation on the beach. They had to burn them.
The death crews not only collected the bodies to burn them, but they also helped to clear the streets and made paths. One of the most dramatic pictures shows a woman with her laundry in a basket walking through the rubble, and the street has been cleared, and on both sides the rubble goes up higher than she is, and she's walking along.
As Galveston lies in ruins, the body of Isaac Klein's wife, Cora May, is found. He can recognize her only by her wedding ring, which he wears on his pinky for the rest of his life. The death toll from the 1900 Galveston hurricane is greater than the deaths from all other American hurricanes combined.
And what a change overnight. One day, Galveston is the star of the state, the grand city. After the storm, funeral pyres are burning in downtown Galveston.
Isaac Klein leaves Galveston and is sent to New Orleans to focus his research on hurricanes and on the storm surges that destroyed his city and killed his wife. He becomes the government's top hurricane scientist and lives to the age of 94, but he is haunted to the end. A decade after the 1900 storm, a huge seawall is finally built on the waterfront, and the entire city is raised by 17 feet, a 20th century miracle of engineering. Today, the glittering jewel on the Gulf that was the largest city in Texas is a far different place.
Of course, Galveston, after the storm, never recovered its economic preeminence. It went from being a leading city to being this sort of picturesque little resort town. So basically, in the span of just a very few years, Galveston went from being New York to being New Jersey.
Despite the seawall and the raised elevation, Galveston will be hit again. It's just a matter of time.
There's not too many places you can live that are risk-free, if you will, from the natural tendency of Mother Nature. There are things we can do to mitigate that, and I think that's the important thing. We learn and we try to build better the next time. We may never quite get to the perfection, but we've learned how to keep people from dying in these storms, which is important.
Scientists now know there is nothing they can do to stop hurricanes or to change their course. All they can do is advise people to evacuate. For those who survived the 1900 storm, the evacuation order never came, and the scars never healed.
When I see these pictures, I think of my grandfather. My grandfather lived to be 88 years old. In the last 2 years of his life, he couldn't tell you what day of the week it was, what year it was. and most of the time he didn't recognize his wife of more than 50 years. But whenever it started to rain and the winds picked up, he could tell you the story of the 1900 storm as though it had happened yesterday, because no disease of the mind is strong enough to erase the memory of that storm.
A cataclysm of wind and water crossed the Atlantic from Africa and chose its victim, Galveston, Texas, a symbol of American daring and 20th century progress. This hurricane packed the same energy as 10,000 atomic bombs and killed more people than the total of all other storms to strike the United States for the next century. It was a deadly collision of natural forces with human overconfidence. The Great